Welcome again. My name is Alejandra Belalcázar. I work for the World Surf League, and I work for WSL Pure, which is the nonprofit partner of the World Surf League. I was introduced to surf therapy through the late Buttons Kaluihukalani. He brought together a lot of surf schools in Encinitas to serve the community of children that had cerebral palsy. So that was my intro to surf therapy, although I didn't really understand the concept because I have been doing it myself for years since I immigrated to the US when I was a teenager and dealing with what it felt like to leave home and come to a new place. So thank you all for being here. Thank you all the therapists and coaches. You guys make the world go round. I know for our community is really important. We would like to open up this conversation by formally recognizing that LA/Manhattan Beach is the ancestral homeland of the Tongva people, as Mark mentioned this morning. The Tongva people have been indigenous to the Los Angeles Basin for at least 7,000 years and are still here, stirred in the land alongside surfers, environmentalists, and others who care about our shared coastline. So this session is about American Indian communities healing through coastal cultural revival of surfing. Healing can permeate through the medical world, throughout industries, and this can be the start of a new awareness in this special topic that we're going to touch on today. So I'm honored to introduce to you two leaders in this space that are very dear to us. Without their work, WSL couldn't have progress. We're still working every single day to be better partners, better allies in all the surrounding communities where the WSL goes. So without them, this couldn't have been possible. So thank you again. This is Dina Gilio Whitaker. She is a Colville Confederated Tribes descendant. She's also a lecturer of American Indian Studies at California State University, San Marcos, and an independent educator in American Indian environmental policy. She teaches courses on environmentalism and American Indians, traditional ecological knowledge, religion and philosophy, Native women activism, American Indians in sports and decolonization, and she's currently under contract with Beacon Press for a new book under the working title, Illegitimate Nation, Privilege, Race, and Belonging in the U.S. Settler State, and is also a co-editor of a new collection from Cambridge University Press Element series on indigenous environmental research. And then we have Mark Chavez here, who was born and raised in Los Angeles County and is Mexican-American Indian of Nahua, Michoacan, and New Mexican Spanish descent. He graduated from the University of California, San Diego, and has over 25 years of experience in higher education and community linkages. And 21 years ago, he founded Native Like Water to focus on both youth and adult cultural exchange between ocean and freshwater land environments. So let's get started. We have divided this presentation in 3 parts. So in the first part, Dina will talk us through key findings on colonization, trauma, healing through cultural, this is a hard word for me, revitalization. And then Mark will walk us through Native Like Water and his findings over the years with cultural conservation, travel, and education. And then we'll go into our panel discussion. So take it away, Dina.
Thank you, Alejandra. Alejandra is, as she said, one of the partners that we work with at the WSL, who is doing just absolutely groundbreaking work in the world of professional surfing, raising diversity and equity issues, and really doing groundbreaking, especially work around acknowledging Indigenous people in their own homeland. It's work that I call unerasing Native people. So before I go on, I want to just introduce myself the way I usually do when I do presentations, in my cultural way, In the language of Insilkchin, we say, "Why pisnak silk e squeezed Dina Julia Whitaker," and that's the language of the Sioux people. I'm a descendant of the Sinaiks band of Colville Confederated Tribes in Washington State, but I was born and raised in Southern California as someone who is colonized. And so that sort of leads into the conversation about what, the kind of the framework that we talk about as scholars, as people, as American Indian people. And it's the appropriate place to begin in this conversation is by acknowledging that American Indian people are always at the highest level for social problems, like the kinds of problems like suicide and alcoholism, substance abuse, mental illness, always at the top. And those problems have, historically been framed as the panel members up here before were saying, like character flaws. This is about American Indian people not being seen as able to adapt to the modern world, just not, flowing with modernity. But we know that there's a different way of looking at it now, and it's really about how colonization has impacted their lives, our lives, as people who lived in very particular ways in relationship with particular lands and ecosystems for untold thousands of years, since time immemorial, as we say. And that process of being colonized is, at its foundation, is the process of being stripped of your culture forcibly, being run off your land, being forced to live in a cultural way that is not your own. And the way that it was done over 500 years, but especially with the American period, is about forced religious conversion. It's about forced, the taking of language, forced education, and a bunch of other things. And so this is really, and it's really the core of that is being, having the breakup of the family, the intentional destruction of families. And this was all institutionalized. It went on for a really long time. It's still happening. There have been changes in the last, roughly half a century, but the forces of assimilation, forced assimilation, are ongoing. And we talk about living in a society that is structurally still colonial. So it's a system that's never ended. It's not a historic event. It's structural. And so it's something that we still live with, still resist on a daily basis. And so that's the framework that we think about it. And more the research shows, and scholars look at the colonization as is imposing trauma. So those social problems, those mental health problems, are a result of what we call intergenerational trauma. And more the research shows that trauma is epigenetic. And I know that this is probably an audience where that word makes sense. I'm personally, I'm a humanities person, and so I'm not in the physical sciences, but I'm learning more and more about the physical process, the biology of how trauma impacts the brain, how people are born into that, and what it does to the brain. Generation after generation, it's passed from mothers to children, and there's a cascade of impacts of, as the work of Dr. Michael Yellowbird talks about. He has this framework that he calls neurocolonization and neurodecolonization, to talk about the impacts of ongoing oppression, so generational oppression, and how that changes the brain structure and how it gets passed from mothers to children. And in fact, I wanted to point to you, I prepared a whole slide deck on this, and if you go into the Whova app and look at our session, I think that slideshow was uploaded to our session so that you can see kind of the science of it. and how it's being taught about right now. So there's that piece of it, understanding that for American Indian people, it's this structure of colonialism that's really responsible for the ongoing mental health issues for Native people. And then conversely, when in this work that Dr. Yellowbird talks about in neurodecolonization, like what is that? This is about this is about cultural revitalization and how important that is for Native people to be brought back into their cultures, to revive cultures, because our cultures had built into them systems of what we might today call mindfulness and wellness. These are, ceremonies, different kinds of cultural practices, being outside, not being sedentary, being actively out in the world and living in harmony with an environment. And all of this was endemic to Native cultures and kept people well. And so bringing those kinds of practices back, not having our religions banned. And the American Indian people are the only people in the United States to not have freedom of religion, beginning in at least 1883, and that doesn't even end until 1978. So we're still coming out of these very oppressive times. But neurodecolonization is about bringing back people into their natural environments, as Mark talks about, bringing back to their cultures, their religions, the songs, the dances, the ceremonies, even surfing. And so what we're seeing here in Southern California and the practices that we're integrating with and engaging with here in Southern California is the reviving, for example, of the building of the Thule boats. Thule boats were the original watercraft of Southern California coastal tribes, and so we're bringing those practices back, and we saw that recently here with the finals, the World Surf League finals at Trestles, and we did a whole demonstration about the building of those boats on the sand, and that was probably the first time in at least a century, if not more, that a boat had been built on that beach. And so it was a really significant and beautiful event. So this is where the work is going. Surfing as we know it today, there's a lot more to say. We'll get to that, but I'm not sure about my time, okay, so so we'll talk about surfing, and surfing, the modern sport of surfing as we know it today, which of course we know comes from the Native Hawaiian culture, our cousins over in the Pacific. I'm going to just stop right there and then let Mark talk.
Yeah, thank you so much for helping us establish that historical context. Mark, please share with us a little bit more about Native Like Water and your work.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, first of all, it's great to be on this panel. Auntie Dina, I kind of found out about her several years ago, and I didn't know we had an indigenous surf scholar in our midst, and it was such a thing. But to find out that we had one, I was like, wow, this is great. And so I just kind of was able to hang out with her at every moment. We had a few board meetings over there at San Onofre, and just to be able to hang out and to know about this, it's been real empowering to me. One of the things that she did mention, I work mostly with teenagers, even though we have adult public programs now. But the Native American teenagers, again, they're coming from this intergenerational trauma, that for the most part, and I don't know if you guys know, it's not a positive thing, but it's something that we have to address, as we had the worst massacres here in California. So and it was more of the recent time because of the gold rush that happened here in California. So the coastal folks, had a very severe situation where there was almost complete annihilation. And so we're having these folks who are survivors, basically, of these wars that we service, that are in our community, and it's quite a shocking thing if you've never been on an Indian reservation. You know, I've worked with the black community, I've worked with the Latino community, and the Native American community is a pretty severe situation. And what we're dealing with constantly is youth that, you know, their parents might not even be there, or they're locked up, or they're passed away, or they're functional users. You know, substance abuse is a real thing. So this is something that's just part of our landscape. Every time I get a group, this is pretty much the majority of what's going on. So it's when we decided to do this in 2000, and I created this program. My big thing was, okay, let's have these programs over here on the coast. And we set up over in La Jolla. If anybody has been to San Diego, they know La Jolla is kind of the crown jewel of San Diego. It's a beautiful place. It resembles kind of like Laguna Beach or some of these other nice beaches. But it wasn't a safe space. You know, we talked about safe space with the practitioners a couple days ago in this conference, and what it takes to make a safe space. When I say it's not a safe space, is because we hadn't been back to these areas, because these areas like La Jolla or a lot of these coastal areas of Southern California are very, very affluent. Nobody looks like you that lives there. Potentially nobody looks like you that's paddling out in the water. So here you have these young people who are descendants of a people that had been there for tens of thousands of years. Since the woolly mammoth was walking in these areas, these folks had been sharing that. Our villages are under the water out here that date over 20,000 years old. So here we have a group of youth coming back to the beach and needing to kind of re-feel like this is a safe space for even them to come out and be around. And because, again, we're at 22 years, we've had at least 4 what I call micro-generations that have been through that. And now these first youth have children, and they're coming back to these places and having their gatherings. I'm seeing them post on social media and stuff in these areas, which is really nice. You know, and like she mentioned, these different types of things that we're dealing with the Thule boat, or what is even our maritime culture. What is our maritime culture beyond just hanging out and fishing along the coast? How are we related to the Hawaiians or the South people in the South Pacific, or even the South Americans? How do we have this relationship that goes farther back than probably what all of you got in elementary school, which was just Columbus, you know, how he discovered America. So we know, thankful that we have folks that we have to go and actually visit, walk the land. Like one day we'll do that in South Africa, walk the land and actually have them tell us stories that are not in the books, and understand what hokulea is, what these traditional voyaging canoes are, and how they did circumnavigate the planet, the earth, and how we related to that. And that sets us for a different context of who we are as a people, because one of the biggest things, as you might know, is having to rebuild self-esteem with our young people, or with the folks who probably have a lot of issues, is just even knowing who we are, where we're at, and maybe even the strength and the power that we have globally, and what that means to us as contributors to a bigger conversation. We get a lot of folks that ask us for alliance within the environmental sector, invite us to different meetings with the Surfrider Foundation or whatnot to sit and try to advocate for these coastal areas. However, we're just beginning to be back there and feel safe and to enjoy these coastal areas. So it's like, you know, you can't protect something you don't understand yet. So a lot of it's us getting on the water. We've had our first voyage a couple years ago, 40 Native folks down in Southern California out on the water on an overnight voyage on the boat. These things haven't taken place like the Thule boat in at least a couple hundred years. So just to get us back on the water, and what does that mean once we get folks back on the water? We know that water has memory. We know that your DNA also has memory. What takes place once they get back on the water with those smells, with those feelings? It's amazing. I can't even say when I first started to bring them, it was just, we knew we needed to start there. and all kinds of different things starts to happen. And I mentioned a little bit about indigenous species being reintroduced to areas that need help. Usually, if anybody's on an environmental type of restoration, you need to eradicate this invasive species to allow space for the indigenous species to grow. And with the growth of indigenous species, you're going to have a benefit to that land and to the people, everybody. Right now, a lot of the cliffs are falling down here in Southern California because of the rising tides. What are they doing? They're implementing indigenous plants right into these cliff areas to save the cliff, to save the railroad, to save their property. You know, why? Because these indigenous plants have a lot that can come. And I like to think about that within regards to our humanity and reclaiming our humanity. You know, humanity is an interesting word. That hue is of color. So all of us here are part of one human family. And to sit with one human family in any environment and not to have that contribution of the indigenous people and indigenous species there would be a disservice to all of us. So it's important that we remain in the contribution, that we do things like we did this morning with just the recognition. But what it is that we're doing is pretty important. You know, we have these songs in Southern California, they're called bird songs. The native people sing these. These are thousands of years old songs passed down from generation to generation. It's one of the few things that remained. You know, like a lot of things we couldn't do anymore because we weren't at the coast, we couldn't practice certain things, but they did remain with these songs. So when we have our programs on the beach, one of the things we do at the night, the cultural nights, when we have our fire and stuff, we bring the bird singers over, and usually, again, the native people were pushed back to the rocks and to the deserts, so they have to travel like an hour to the coast, and they're there, and they come with their bird songs. And one of the gentlemen came and says, you know, Mark, I've been singing this song with my grandfather since I was a little boy, and this song is about singing on the edge of the water to the ocean with our feet in the sand. He goes, Mark, but I've never sang this song on the water's edge or at the ocean till just tonight. And I was like, whoa, you guys have been singing this song since you were little, but never sang it on the beach? Never sang it by the water? No, but we have this song and we sing it. And we did it tonight for the first time. I was like, wow, that's really set me back. I was like, this is great. These are the things, what positioning helps, or just providing space, you know, allowing us even a sliver of space. What we did, we got invited over to Long Island, New York, Kaliko and I, and we're taking the Sub-Squatch around. The Sub-Squatch is kind of like a surfboard that can fit like 10 or more people. We took one out this morning, a smaller one this morning. It was about 5 or 6 of us, and we can all surf and stand up at the same time. It's pretty cool. We have a bigger one that we took out to Long Island, and we had like 10, 12 people on there. But they have access to their bay, which is just waveless, with a waveless bay, but out in the Hamptons, I don't know if you've ever been on Long Island, but the Hamptons is a very affluent area, kind of a 13 colony vibe over there. But they just got back a sliver to the beach that has waves, and because over there you can't in the Hamptons you can't just park and just pull up and park and go to the beach. Even though there's all kinds of open space, it's very, very colonized and in the sense that it's policed. So you just couldn't do that. So we were able to do that this year for the first time, have a little sliver so we can walk to the beach and park and walk and go practice again on the Sub-Squatch. So this was, I guess you could say, we kicked it off and the first time these guys are surfing, and it was just, you know, again, most of you are surf therapists, just to see how everything just changes. While we were out there, you know, they have one of the oldest powwows. A powwow is a kind of a gathering of dancing and a kind of an exhibition, which they started because, again, it was outlawed to do ceremonial stuff. But it's over almost 100 years old, this powwow. And you know, we're out there in the ocean, and I live in mainland Mexico. We have a program and a camp down there, and we see a lot of different migrations. It's pretty wild out there of different stuff. But you know, Kaliko and I went out there with the youth, and we're out there floating on the Sub-Squatch. I had never seen such a huge fish migration in my life, and I go to really wild spots. It was just, I couldn't believe how much there was just fish everywhere. Probably went for miles. And it was just, it was incredible. And I was thinking, this powwow probably is connected with some kind of of a harvest time or some kind of a special time that they did probably years ago that's connected to, again, to what's happening in nature. So it's very important that we stay aligned with the laws of nature. And some people ask me, what is indigenizing education? And that's one of our mottos since the beginning of our program. Our aim was to indigenize education. What is that? Well, it's an earth-based education. It's aligning yourself with the laws of nature. There's men laws, but then there's the laws of nature that have been going on for thousands of years. And that's basically it. Let's just stay close to that. And some of our teachers that actually started talking about this, indigenizing education, was that if we can go the farthest from westernized education, the stuff that we learn in universities, and kind of swing this way, what would that look like? It doesn't mean to get rid of Western education. It's just there's an indigenized way of being, a way of knowing, and it's either I don't know if I learned it in Hawaii, but it was like either you know or you don't know. There's no such thing as believing. It's an interesting thing, And in our travels, because our program is international, we go to Panama, Jamaica, Mexico, Hawaii, and of course here in California, we're able to visit other tribes. We do international exchanges. So when we cruised out down to Panama, we have people from Hawaii or people from wherever you're from, and we exchange these stories. And it's interesting that our creation stories are very, very, very similar. That the Milky Way is the belly button to the universe. What they call how do they say belly button in Hawaiian?
Pico.
The pico, right, the pico. And there's a pico up here too, another opening right here that connects us, And that's the same, we come from the stars. We're mostly carbon and water. That's why we kind of call ourselves native like water, to understand our relationship to water, understand our relationship to each other, that we're more water than we are skin and bones. Then it's not about color. We're like droplets all sitting here. So we're looking to unify ourselves, to see the power in ourselves, and as water protectors, to start with ourselves first. And it's been a wonderful thing to be a surfer. And I was telling some of us, this program that I have, surfing was like only 10 to 20% of what we did until COVID hit. And then it was like, if I can do one thing coming out of the gates out of COVID, what would I do? And it was just everybody in our program always remembered one thing the most, and that was the day we took them surfing. And so it's like, we're going to do surfing now, and that means I get to spend more time in the water. So I was like, this is good for me. It's good for everybody. So, the surfing has been a wonderful thing. I'm just glad I could wear my flip-flops on the stage right now and address all of you. And I want to just say thank you for listening, and thank you for all that you're doing too.
Thank you so much. I love what you said, that it starts with us.
Yeah.
And I've gotten the chance to see Mark's programs work, and it flows with a really holistic cycle, and its indigenous approach in reaffirming the indigenous connection with the ocean. So I feel really humbled by all you guys' experience, and I'm really thankful that you're sharing this with us today. I have a couple of questions for both of you. So this one is for Dina and Mark. So what do you think the impact has been in mainstream surf culture to honor and make visible indigenous communities?
Well, the obvious answer to that question is the work that we've been doing with WSL for the last couple of years. And I don't know, maybe Mark's got something else to say, but for me, that's what it is. I talked about the process, the work that I do as a scholar, as an American Indian Studies scholar and a surf scholar, and a surfer. I am a surfer. I grew up in Southern California, but I learned to surf on the North Shore way, way back when, in another day and another era. And surfing for me was just, I don't know, I grew up surfing the waves, body surfing in Santa Monica as a child. And then moving to the North Shore, that's where I learned to stand up surf. And surfing became, I don't know, I guess part of my own wellness practice in a way. And so, but as a scholar, the work that I do is, a response to the systematic erasure of Native people in our education systems, in our social systems, our political systems, everything that structures the U.S., the dominant society as we know it, is built on that invisibility of the systematic disappearance of Native people, discursively and physically in every way. So the work of unerasure is about, like, I sometimes call it infiltrating too, like moving into spaces where Native people are really even more invisible. And surf culture is one of those spaces. Surf culture, as we know it, since it came here in 1907 with George Freeth from Hawaii, and it becomes implanted here in Southern California, was on the heels, as the way that I write about it, is that it could only happen, surf culture could only happen on the heels of a genocide, of ethnic cleansing. When all of this land, all of this beach landscape descended down from the Spanish ranchos into American hands after the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And it's a very interesting history. It's very awful and terrible, but this is how the land goes from being owned and occupied primarily from indigenous people to the Spanish, then to Mexican, and then to Americans. And so by 1907, when George Freeth comes here and starts, in Venice and Redondo Beach, giving these surfing demonstrations and generating this the sensation, surfing it's a white space. It's white people that live at the oceans, that are buying the oceanfront property, so that a surf culture can take hold. And not just a surf culture, but a beach-centered lifestyle, in the words of, how many people know the work of Peter Westwick and Nuschel, who wrote a book called The World in the Curl? Okay, you want to read a really interesting surf history, that's one. This came out in 2013, tells a story of Southern California history in a way that you've never read it before. These guys are out of UC Santa Barbara, and they're historians and they're surfers. And so they tell the story about the rise of Southern California culture as a beach-centered culture, which is, of course, all about surfing. And so surfing for a century is narrated by white male journalists, beginning with Alexander Hume Ford in Hawaii in the same era, the early, what we say, fin de siècle, turn of the century Hawaii. Jack London, Alexander Hume Ford developed this whole plan to use surfing as a tool to build a tourist industry. So surfing is actually the colonization of surfing begins with these two white men, and so this is what sets Hawaii on the course that it is now, as a tourist-based economy, with surfing at the very center of it, and this concept of aloha and hula and all of that. So the commodification of Native Hawaiian culture. And so something really similar happens here in Southern California. And so for a century, surfing is dominated by white males. Like, I think it's not a surprise to all of us. And so all of this, it's the replication of the colonial system is how surfing evolves in Southern California. And so that's the work that I've been trying to do as a scholar, is to shine the light on it, to say, hey, this is what surfing is, but there's this whole other historical context to it. And so that we have, and so my work as somebody who's infiltrating that, not only am I a woman, I'm a Native woman, as a surfer, coming into these spaces, having these conversations and saying, look, there's a different way of looking at this. Let's understand surfing in its actual historical context. And so that's the work that's what I did effectively when I infiltrated the WSL with Mark and another friend of ours. But it began with like, hey, you guys, there's something, you guys are missing the boat on some things, and like, let's, here's how you can do better. And they listened. And so we're in a time, we're in a historical moment now where people they're kind of hungry for a different perspective, different knowledge. They want truth. People know they've been lied to for a really, really long time, and it's no longer acceptable. And so, and that's what I'm finding is the case with WSL and some of the also conservation organizations. Mark was talking about some of the ocean conservation organizations like Surfrider, and there's this whole network of marine protected area networks. So these are all connected. They're all related, and there are a lot of the same people too. So we're having a conversation that's like we're dropping a pebble into water and it's rippling. And what did we hear last night? We were at the Surfrider. Surfrider had a big gala fundraiser last night, and we were there, and Sean Thompson was there. They were giving an honoring for him, and he was saying about dropping a pebble in water that creates ripples, and those become waves. And so that's, I thought that was such a great metaphor, and that's really the work that we're doing here.
Yes, and the change starts with us. So ISTO having us here is throwing that rock or that pebble, making those waves, and hopefully you guys will be making waves back wherever you guys come from. And it takes a little effort. WSL has to make a little effort to find people like us to hold time and hold space. So it's a little hard. But again, most of us are all what I call malnourished, or one of my Hawaiian scholar bros tells me, education is just such a malpractice. It's such a educational malpractice. And I was like, wow, that's true. A lot of us have been diagnosed or given the wrong information all through school, and not even having this stuff. So it's definitely for all of us. Surfing, I think one of the best contests that I've seen with surf contests and is the Hui shootout, which is kind of a Hawaiian-led vibe. Last year, I think after COVID, it's kind of been tough getting around, but Kaipo did a great commentary on the Hui shootout a couple of years ago, where he's able to educate a lot of folks on different things, all Hawaiian. And again, bring back, I like to say, bring back the culture to surf culture. Bring back some of this original culture. We have so much to learn. It's good for all of us. You don't need to be usurped or eradicated. It's just that we have so much to learn. It's beautiful for all of us. And then again, we're just finding out what our role is in surfing. Because you could see the dolphin surfing, everybody's, all the birds surfing, the seals surfing, so many things surf. It was just I really think it was just a natural thing we all did. It just makes sense. They see little kids go to the ocean for the first time and that wave pushes them. This is something I think we all did that was close to the water and the water wasn't too cold. So it's just, let's bring back the culture. Let's bring back the culture, and let's be able to, when we arrive at the ocean, we could see things different. Now that we know, wow, this village was here, and they did this, and these contributions, and it's a whole different take on stuff. So yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm definitely learning to unlearn a lot of the things I've been taught. So I really appreciate you both, and I just wanted to add that a lot of surfers, we have a really special connection to our break. And we're very protective of that local space, but many times we're oblivious to the rich and complex history of that space. So starting with First People and colonization, and then social and economic dynamics that are making coastlines really inaccessible to people of color. So just throwing that out there, and thank you both for mentioning that. So I have a question for you, Mark. Surfing means different things to different people, but for most people, it seems to evoke a deep sense of connection to the natural world, even a sense of spirituality. How is surfing similar and or different for Indigenous people, and how has that shaped Native Lake Water's mission?
Yeah, that's a good question. Once we're getting out folks on the boards and in the water, and a lot of times floating over some of these ancient villages that are in the shallows, and it was kind of a phenomenon a few years ago, but seeing the kind of we don't really see turtles here in Southern California that much, but kind of seeing them coming back with us there, it affects us like she said, time immemorial. You know, at our surf camp in mainland Mexico, right now we have thousands of turtles coming up to the beach, literally thousands. Like you can't even walk, and the beaches are big. And you know, we're down there and we're like, whoa. I came back to my maternal territory, which is down there in mainland Mexico 7 years ago, and I felt like that turtle. You know, I felt like that turtle. We started a surf fellowship a few years ago, and that was the questions. What can the turtle and the birds show us? If they could speak, what would they tell us? What can we just learn by watching them and what they do? And so as indigenous people, I think it brings us closer. It starts to make the world, we're really part of a bigger world. And again, we're part of a bigger universe. And so I think it strikes our curiosity. I think it empowers us in our minds that maybe we're not just here anymore on the reservation or just on the west side or wherever people are kind of just contained. A lot of times because of poverty or because of whatnot, we're just contained in little spots. So I think it opens us up to a universal knowledge, and that's why I kind of refer to the Milky Way and stuff like that, because again, we a lot of times we refer to ourselves as star people. Think about the stars, think about time immemorial, what that means. Think about just 20,000 years that we can carbon date. And just think about carbon itself and water. You know, it's interesting that we're sequestering carbon now. I work with a lot of African American folks. We have programs in Panama, and it's interesting that they're sequestering carbon now. You know, it's just interesting. Just the sound of that, and you know, what they're doing. Even though we've been, you know, so apartheid or or racist within our history against African folks, you know, it's interesting that now the big goal is to sequester carbon. You know, it's interesting because that's what we are. We're actually carbon and water mostly. So it's just a big interesting thing. It connects us to the universe. I think it opens up our minds and our relationships to everybody.
Thank you so much for shedding light on that. And Dina, would you like to add anything? I know you guys work closely, and I do have a separate question for you. Go with your separate. All right. Dina, can you share some of your thoughts about how colonialism has influenced surfing and how we can decolonize mainstream surfing so that the ocean truly becomes a place for all?
So I think it's, you know, going back to the learning and unlearning and the histories that we've been taught. A lot of people I find don't really know don't know surf history. They don't know, it's not uncommon to talk to people. Most people seem to know that surfing comes from Hawaii, surfing as we know it, but they don't know much beyond that. And this history, as I was talking about with Alexander Hume Ford and Jack London, and them really conspiring to create a tourist industry, using surfing to create a tourist industry, because surfing happens at a time. This is during the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom government happens in 1893 when the Americans come in with the militias and just take over totally illegally, and it's in partnership with the business interests, white business, the sugar planters, and other basic business people who are there to capitalize on the land. And they form the Outrigger Canoe Club. The people who, and it's all white men, white businessmen, led by Alexander Hume Ford, and they form this club to use outrigger to take, really it's a cultural appropriation is what's happening, and it's for the benefit of the white colonizers, and so this is how surfing as we know it is really a cultural appropriation. It's a colonized sport. It's a little bit more complicated because we do see, you know, Duke Kahanamoku going to Australia, taking surfing and teaching people how to surf there. We see George Freeth coming here to Southern California. He's Native Hawaiian, and you know, spreading the sport and the love of the sport. So it's a little bit of both, but ultimately surfing's used to to sell land. It's used to sell land here in Southern California. It's used to build a tourist industry in Hawaii, which of course we all probably are aware of what that's led to for the Native Hawaiian population, who 50% of them don't even live in the Hawaiian Islands anymore. They are being pushed out generation after generation because of the pressures of the socioeconomic system there. And so understanding that surfing as we know it there's nothing pure about it, and there's a whole lot to say about that. The quest for purity, cultural authenticity in surfing, like it's not possible. There is no cultural authenticity or purity unless you're Native Hawaiian and you're surfing, in your own homelands. So surfing as we know it is a cultural, you could say a symbiosis, a bringing together of other cultures, and so I think it begins with realizing that surfing has been used as a tool of cultural appropriation and colonization, and admitting it and talking about it so that we can kind of undo some of that and restore the cultural centeredness of certainly from the Hawaiians, but in places where surfing is not indigenous. And we don't know if surfing is not indigenous to Southern California. We don't have all of we think that wave riding was a tradition. It had to have been practiced here in Southern California by the indigenous people because of the use of the tule boats and for fishing purposes. So they would had to have learned how to negotiate waves coming in on those boats. But we don't have the documentation for all of that. So that's still an evolving base of knowledge. But it's, we certainly know that the cultures here were ocean-based and we're very, very connected, and probably learned to play in the ocean like every culture who is close to the ocean. So, yeah.
Thank you. I really love what you said about learning to play in the ocean. And with that, I would love to open it up to the audience for any questions that you may have.
Questions?
Hello? Okay. First of all, thank you for all three of you. You really gave me so much. I almost missed this for other things, and I was like, wow, I'm so glad I didn't. And just some things I'm going to really remember, this idea of not having religious freedom from, you said 1883 to 78. Wow. That's something I never even considered. And surfing as a tool for cultural appropriation, you're really opening my eyes to things. And I don't know if you guys saw this, but at the very beginning when you started talking, this crow dropped this piece of trash in the middle of this piece of plastic yogurt thing, just dropped from the sky. And I was like, that can't be a coincidence. It's sort of like, I don't want your shit anymore. Take it back. And
it's classic crow trickster energy.
Right. And as you were talking about all this, cultural appropriation, just this thought of not only that, but cultural pollution, I thought of, and just what that must feel like. And it feels a little overwhelming sometimes to think, wow, what can I do? Thinking about even pollution and thinking about huge corporations that are doing this. But, we do things like beach cleanups and do small, I really believe in the power of small little things. So in terms of just the crow telling me to take your shit back, what are some small things that the land acknowledgement, which you've shown us and modeled so well, but what are some small things that on an individual basis to have that little ripple effect are there that you think that somebody like me could do?
That's always a question that comes up. People want to know what they can do, and different people will say different things. For me, it's always about education. So continue to educate yourself, continue to read about Native people where you're at, wherever you live. Find out who are the Native people of the land where you live. How might you connect with them? What kinds of activities are they doing to reclaim their culture and land? Learn about the land back movement. How many people here have heard that phrase, land back? So it's a movement and it's gaining steam. And land back doesn't mean that, everybody gives their land back and back to the Indians and you go back to where you came from. That's not what it's about. It's about how you can support Native people, yes, to get their land back, but land back means a bunch of different things. It really is about restoring indigenous jurisdiction over land so that they can bring their cultural land-based traditional environmental management practices back on the land, because that's what we need right now. We are at a point of existential crisis in this country, on the world in general, but especially in this country, because those traditional sustainable practices of the indigenous people have been removed from the land. It needs to be restored, and so part of the land back movement is about restoring those traditional practices, sustainability, and a lot of that's happening in the coast right now, like in California, especially in the northern coast. So learn about what indigenous peoples are doing to bring back that traditional ecological knowledge into ocean spaces, for example, and another thing you could do is follow what WSL is doing. Go to WSL's website and read some of the articles that have been published there about their work with Native communities in the U.S. and beyond, because they're not doing it just in the U.S. They're doing it everywhere they go especially on their world tour. They're showcasing indigenous cultures and building partnerships, and that's what that's about, like building allyship with Native communities. And that's going beyond land acknowledgement. We don't want to stop at land acknowledgement as just a tokenizing of Native people and just to make ourselves feel good. That's just the beginning point. The actual goal is to build relationships with Native people.
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes just, trying to go and participate in certain things. I know it's kind of a funny thing. Sometimes you don't want to feel like an intruder or just a looky-loo. But if you have sincere heart and interest for change, that'll be known. But just to participate, I've been inviting a lot of allies to come sit with us. Usually they invite us to come sit with them, and it's kind of the same structure with the boardroom and the kind of, get bored to death type of stuff. But, just to come sit with us, whether it be in a board meeting out in the water or just come to some of our functions if you have that availability. For me, it's changing the narrative. Like she said, it's just like, how can we change the narrative together? How can we be inclusive in the narrative? How we can be inclusive in what it is that we present, our curriculum. A lot of environmental campaigns that come across my desk or my email, they lack the human element of us, of what would we say if we were included in that. But again, to be included in that, you have to have a vested interest in that. And for our folks, being away from the coast, sometimes they're not paddling out every day like we are as surfers. So for me, it's just let's show up, let's get them in the water, let's get people where they get addicted to the water, to the ocean, and so they could be there and be advocates. We're having to create advocates. So I guess if you're in a space where you can create some space to having that inclusion of folks to be there, I mean, all kinds of stuff starts to take place. And you're creating you're scarifying these seeds.
If we have one more question, we can squeeze that in before we wrap up. Anyone?
My question is that if you look forward into the future, I'm really curious what your vision is, let's say in 10 years, in 50 years. What are some signs that things have really changed?
Well, I'll just, real quick, I'm super stoked that I have, probably the first Native American, surf crew or surf team that we have, and they're in the high school age, which I probably couldn't do a generation ago. So I'm, pinching myself that we get to catch waves together, and that's coming together, again, to fulfill changing the narrative. So, I'm really stoked on how it's going. Sometimes I wish maybe things can move faster, but you know, we did some historical things these last couple of years. Again, just by being included in the narrative on the world platform of WSL or at the Trussell's thing, there's been a couple things like, again, we were invisible before. So after so many years, it's like, it's a small little thing, but for us, it's a big thing because this is where it starts. What? Oh, there's Indians here? What? Or the pro surfers too. They're like, what? You guys did a blessing in the morning? Oh, I wish we were there. Nobody told us about it. So it's like, how can we even do this even better? So, you know what I mean? Because it's all just, like she says, education. We call it the narrative, you know, disrupting the mainstream narrative and reclaiming our humanity.
Well, a big picture for me, it's like way bigger than surfing. It's about restoring true indigenous sovereignty's political relationship to the federal government. Who knows things are going to look like in 50 or 100 years. I mean, I personally, as a humanities scholar who studies societies, I mean, I think that we're in a period of social collapse right now. I'm not, I like to be optimistic, but there are reasons to find optimism in certain things, but I do think that we are in a period of collapse, and probably from collapse will come transformation, and so that would be the positive outcome for what we're experiencing now. But we need a transformation of our colonial, patriarchal, capitalistic, extractive society. Like that's the reality of where we live, and then so we have to figure out how to transcend that, and it's going to be indigenous knowledge and indigenous people that have to lead the way to a more sustainable and sane way of being on the planet.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate both of you. You guys have done the groundwork, the heavy lifting for a lot of us, and I hope that eventually the whole surf community can reciprocate that labor that you have done to continue to give a platform to all the important things that you guys are doing in all the indigenous communities around the world. So as a takeaway, I would love for everybody in the audience to go home, wherever home is, to sit down with somebody from your community that you'd probably never sit down with, to just find out. In my understanding, we create empathy through understanding. And I'm sure all of you guys that work in the therapeutic space understand that. So how do you build that into your own practice? How do you build that into your programs? So thank you guys all for this really engaging conversation. Let's continue this momentum and continue bringing it into every space for all people of color. So thank you guys all so much.
On Instagram, we're Native Like Water, or nativelikewater.org on the web, and we have a November 26th. We have a retreat and a surf therapy facilitator training with Groundswell that we're doing in mainland Mexico. So if any of you guys really want some waves, they're going to overlay their curriculum of the surf therapy training facilitator on top of our indigenous curriculum that we already have. So it's going to be pretty cool. This is exactly kind of what we're doing here. These are the things that we have to keep doing, just kind of overlaying these things so we can cross-pollinate.
Thank you guys so much, and Mark, thanks so much for the